Very shy. The last kid you'd expect to stand in front of other people and speak, and yet he on his own chose to join the debate team at Columbine and was one of the better debaters they had. And he's really been the inspiration for me because I'm also very introverted, and he gave me that inspiration to overcome that and be able to speak. So a little bit about Colorado Ceasefire. We are an all-volunteer organization for over 21 years. We formed in 2000. We're statewide, very much grassroots. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit. We are not anti-gun. We are anti-gun violence. And we have three basic branches. One is a legislative action side. We're the ones who do the lobbying. We're very busy right now down at the state capitol. 5 different gun safety bills are up right now. We also have an education and outreach part of the organization. That's who I'm really speaking on behalf of today. And we have a political action committee that supports candidates who support what we do. Our basic mission is to reduce gun violence through education, outreach, legislative advocacy. We really want a state free from gun violence. Okay, I'm going to be talking about our Extreme Risk Protection Order Law, ERPO. A couple of basic things I got to tell you first. One is Colorado actually does not use the term restraining orders. If you look at legally, we use protection orders. But I think most people, of course, when it comes to domestic violence, they still use the term restraining order. But officially, it's a protection order. Second, the law we refer to as the red flag law. Now, we have some people in the mental health community that have asked us and have suggested we not use that term because it's kind of a sensitive term for them. But the fact is, the media and many people in the public call it the red flag law. So I mostly will call it the red flag law. But occasionally I'll refer to ERPO, the official title, Extreme Risk Protection Orders. Okay, next I'm going to do a little video, and I'm going to have Pat do this because technology, forget it for me.
All right. We're going to do a little bit of adjustments here to try and get the sound to work. So our sound just doesn't want to work with the technology, so we're going to try a couple things here. This is the second time we've done this presentation, so thank you for your patience. What do you think, Rob? All right. Oops.
And
Whoops, here we go. Go ahead.
And while they're doing that, how many of you are familiar, generally have heard of the red flag law? Great. That is great.
Do you know someone at risk of suicide or violence against others who has access to a firearm? Gun violence takes the lives of over 800 Coloradans every year, and the vast majority of these gun deaths are suicides. In Colorado, you have a tool to help a loved one from harming themselves or others. An Extreme Risk Protection Order Law, also known as ERPO, was created to temporarily prevent someone at risk of harm from buying or having access to guns. Family or household members, in addition to law enforcement, can request an ERPO. If the threat of violence requires immediate attention, you can request a temporary ERPO that is considered the day that it is filed. If granted, the temporary ERPO will last up to 2 weeks ahead of a full hearing for a final order that is in effect for up to 364 days. Depending on the immediate level of risk, you can file directly for a final ERPO. This process would require a hearing, at which both parties may participate. How do I use it? You can go to the district or county court where your loved one resides and file a petition. They will then be informed and given a copy of the petition. A hearing with a judge will determine if your loved one is at high risk and should have the ERPO take effect. If an ERPO is issued, firearms must be surrendered to law enforcement or sold to a federally licensed firearm dealer, putting time and space between an at-risk individual and a firearm. An ERPO can be renewed after 1 year if the risk of violence remains. Once the order expires, the firearms are returned. Why should I use this tool? If you know someone who is at risk of harming themselves or others and has access to a firearm, an ERPO can be a life-saving resource. ERPOs have been used in efforts to prevent mass shootings, suicides, and domestic violence. ERPOs are a proactive way to prevent unnecessary harm. Interested in learning more? Visit americanhealth.jhu.edu/implement-ERPO for a step-by-step guide on how to use this tool. Together, we can prevent gun violence. We are not providing legal advice. Every factual situation is unique, and if an individual wants legal advice specific to their particular circumstances, they should consult knowledgeable counsel.
Okay. And if you didn't catch some of that, it's okay, because I'll be covering some of these things anyhow. A little bit of background. How did we get here? Of course, we had the Aurora movie theater shooting. In that particular case, became very evident we had somebody who was in crisis. The shooter was being treated by a mental health counselor. He spoke of wanting to harm people, but the threat that he has was not real specific. It was not an imminent threat. So the counselor was very concerned. She informed campus police, but there was nothing anybody could do. Not even, in this case, an M1 hold. If you're anybody familiar with an M1 hold, it's a 72-hour mental health hold, but you have to meet a certain threshold to get that. Nothing could be done, and we know what happened then as a result of that. It just seemed like everybody, but the parents were also notified, and they said, okay, yeah, we'll come out and we'll visit him in another month. So in 2013, we passed a number of gun laws in response to Aurora and Parkland. Oh, no, not Parkland, but Sandy Hook. One of them being a magazine limit, another being universal background checks. But there was still a feeling that this wasn't enough. How would that deal with the Aurora situation? So it was suggested to Ceasefire that we gather people together and talk about red flag laws that they had in other states. So in 2016, we sponsored a forum, and it brought together social workers, law enforcement, mental health professionals, a number of different people, and talked about this issue. And they pretty much agreed we need to move ahead with something like a red flag law. So it was in 2018 that a bill was introduced, and it didn't pass, unfortunately. It died. And then that following January, right, December, January, we had this terrible tragedy in Highlands Ranch, where Deputy Zachary Parrish was killed by a man who was clearly in crisis. Law enforcement knew that he was troubled. His mother knew that he was troubled. She took away his guns, and then he threatened to sue her. He was in law school. He threatened to sue her if she didn't give the guns back. She gave the guns back, and it was those guns that were used to kill the deputy sheriff and injure 3 other deputy sheriffs. So the following year, bill was introduced again, and I think especially because of that whole case with Deputy Parrish, it passed in 2019. We have a red flag law. So ERPOs help prevent gun violence. Families and law enforcement are usually the first to see the warning signs of someone who's in crisis. By crisis, that's somebody who may have homicidal thoughts. It's somebody who has suicidal thoughts. But again, as it is, you may see those warning signs, but if you don't have a way to do something about it, then tragedy happens. So what is an ERPO? First of all, it's a civil action. So when people start talking about, we shouldn't be doing this to people and creating a criminal record, it is not a criminal action. It is a civil action. It allows a household member or law enforcement to petition the court to temporarily remove an individual's firearms and prohibits them from buying a firearm until that order is over. And they do this if they pose a significant risk to themselves or to others. Now, I want to insert one little thing here. This is for household members or law enforcement. Right now, there's a bill in the legislature, it was heard for the first time in the House committee last week, that would expand those who can petition to include educators, mental health professionals, and district attorneys. Hopefully that will pass, and I'll tell you why later. How does ERPO help people? It removes gun access so the person can seek treatment. That will be a key thing that comes out of this when they're meeting before the judge. The judge is going to want to know what help are you going to get to help you through this crisis that you're in. Hopefully it will stabilize their behaviors and enable them to get resources to address their behaviors. What behaviors indicate an ERPO might be needed is a personal crisis, suicidal thoughts, aggression, a history of domestic violence, demonstrated signs of violence and history of violence, and unsafe behavior with firearms. Okay, when we say a household, somebody from a household can request an ERPO. Who's a member of the household? Somebody who's related by blood, marriage, adoption. They have a common child. They've resided with the respondent in the last 6 months. And we say respondent. Respondent is the person who you were seeking to place an ERPO restriction on. That is the respondent. They're a domestic partner, so this isn't just marriage. It could be a domestic partner, step-parents, step-children, grandparents, grandchildren, legal guardians, and somebody who's past or present married or unmarried couples. So what happens? Somebody who's requesting an ERPO, they request a temporary ERPO. So you go through the process of requesting an ERPO in your district court, and the hearing is held within 7 days of you requesting it. Within 1 day. Within 1 day, a hearing is held. So they're really giving this significance. And it is an ex parte hearing. That is, the respondent, the person who you're seeking to remove the firearms from, is not notified of this. It's within 1 day, and then a judge will decide whether to issue an ERPO or not. If the judge finds cause, if they do, then law enforcement will remove the firearms and ensure that the respondent cannot legally purchase firearms. So they're putting in the database that they can't make a purchase. Respondent has to surrender their concealed carry permit. The respondent is informed of the upcoming hearing for consideration of a full ERPO. So temporary ERPO happens first, and then there's a hearing for the full ERPO. And then if the judge issues that temporary ERPO, it's valid for up to 14 days. A hearing must be held, a full hearing must be held within 14 days. So, law enforcement is then, if a temporary is issued, law enforcement is going to remove firearms from that person. Now, you might say, wow, isn't that a pretty risky situation to go and tell someone you're going to remove their firearms? Most smart law enforcement officers know how to do these kind of things. You don't go to the house and say, we're here to get your guns. They've told us that they will do things like have an idea of their movements, how they're coming and going, and try to get them in a neutral situation and serve the ERPO on them, and then say, okay, we need to remove your firearms. Where are they? A lot of times they're given background information from the person who filed the petitioner, where their firearms might be. So that's temporary ERPO. Now, after, again, within 14 days then a hearing is held where the respondent is able to state their case. They're notified of the hearing. They may have legal counsel, and the state will pay for that legal counsel at that hearing. If the petitioner establishes risks to self or others, the court then may issue a full or continuing ERPO for 364 days. Now, it is renewable after that 364 days, but you then go through the same process again of showing this person is a danger to themselves or others. And the respondent may appeal one time during that 364 days. They may come back in and say, look, I've been getting mental health counseling. I know that I was suicidal. I was really in a bad place. I was going through a lot of bad things. I've gotten through that. And here's why I think I'm okay to have my guns back. So, a little bit about the steps. How do you obtain an ERPO? Step one, you request a petition from a district or county court, and there's a form that you can download in this system. They'll walk you through it. You submit the petition to a district or county court in the county where the respondent lives. This is a real key thing. It has to be where the respondent lives. If you live in a different county, if you file in your county, it's going to be thrown out. It has to be in the county where the respondent lives. There's no fee, and it's important to know, this is going to look strange to you, there are Sherlocks, they call them. There are Sherlocks in county courts that are there to help people through the court process. So it's not like you're alone. Ask for a Sherlock to help you through that process. Next step, if you file a temporary ERPO, the court will, as I said, have a hearing within 1 day. The petitioner must attend in person. Phone only in special circumstances. You need to appear before the judge because you're stating your case, why this person should give up their firearms temporarily. If the court issues an ERPO, the respondent then has to surrender their firearms and their concealed weapons permit. They're banned from buying guns, and they're provided a list of behavioral health resources. What happens when an ERPO terminates or expires? Well, the firearms are required to return within 3 days after the respondent requests their return. And again, it's only if they're eligible to possess a firearm. If they're a felon, then they can't get their firearm back. Then next they will update the background check system to tell it they can now purchase a firearm. And then the respondent can reapply for a concealed carry permit. We are not the only state that has this law. As you can see from this map, there are a number of other states that have it, 17 states and District of Columbia, and includes a couple of red states too. Indiana has had one for quite some time, and Florida now has one. How is ERPO abuse prevented? This was one of the complaints when we were in hearings to pass the ERPO law. This is going to be abused by people. Well, it's important to know that the petitioner has to establish by a preponderance of evidence that a person possesses a significant risk of injury to self or others. This is not just, well, I thought I heard them talking about maybe shooting up someplace. Okay, when did they do that? How often did they do that? You really have to convince a judge that this person should have their firearms removed. If it's a full year ERPO, that is the ongoing one, after that 14-day hearing, not just preponderance, it has to be clear and convincing evidence that this person is a danger to themselves or others. And the petitioner must sign an affidavit signed under oath and penalty of perjury. So you're on the line there. You know, this is not something to be abused. If you perjure yourself about the condition of this person, you could be charged. Some myths and facts. First, it's unconstitutional. It's an infringement on our right to bear arms. This law has been challenged in 2 states, and it's been held to be constitutional. It doesn't provide due process. Okay, this is one of the key complaints that you'll hear about the red flag law. And it's because it's ex parte. 2 things to know. In the case of ex parte, we do the same thing in domestic violence cases. That is, in a domestic violence case, a spouse or a partner would go to the court and ask for a restraining order. That would be issued in most cases, or all cases, without the knowledge of the person who you're seeking to put the restraining order against. And why? There's a reason for this. Can you imagine, in the case of an ERPO, someone who was suicidal, and if it wasn't ex parte, you go to this person and you say, oh, we're going to be trying to get an ERPO against you, and there'll be a hearing in 14 days. there's a decent chance that you're encouraging that person to commit suicide before their gun is taken away. So there's really good, and also in terms of danger to the police, I think it's better to do it ex parte. Myths: we greatly abused by police, ex-girlfriends, hateful neighbors. Again, it's an evidence-based petition process, and it's only right now household members and law enforcement. Another thing that you'll hear as a complaint: why don't you just use the M1 process? M1 process doesn't work in cases where someone is in danger of themselves or others. Why? Basically, when someone is put on a 72-hour hold, in most cases, they're not in that facility anywhere near 72 hours. We don't have enough beds. We release them a lot sooner than that. And if it's less than 72 hours, they're treated. They're not really treated. They're just calmed down. They go back home to their firearms. So that is what is different. They're not cured in 72 hours. Law enforcement will be blowing down doors to confiscate firearms. No, that's not what it's called for. There is a search warrant. Retrieving firearms puts law enforcement at risk. Yes, it can. They need to handle it well, like I said earlier, and figure out when they're going to do that. People will attempt suicide in another way if firearms are removed. 85% of attempts by gun end in death versus 5% in non-firearm attempts. This is especially a tool for dealing with suicide. This won't stop all mass shootings and suicides. Yeah, that's true. But it's one vital added tool for prevention. It's a tool in the toolbox. A little bit about what we've seen in the 3 years we've had the red flag law. Over 380 petitions have been filed. Now, when this law was up for consideration in hearings, we heard these wild stories. There'd be thousands and thousands of attempts to file ERPOs. That hasn't been the case. And that's been the experience in other states also. Actually, Colorado per capita has been lower than a number of the other states that have ERPO. Majority of the ERPO filings have been from law enforcement, and they've been more successful. The citizens' filings have been much less successful, and they tend to have more mistakes in the filings. That's why in some ways it's better to go to law enforcement, to have them make the filing based on the information that you provide to them. It's filed for prevention of suicides, mass shootings, domestic violence. Denver is the highest. Then we've got, of course, the Second Amendment sanctuary counties, and I'm in one of them right now, I think, where they have many fewer ERPO filings. We have Colorado shootings where ERPOs really should have been filed. Let's see, well, especially the Boulder King super shooter. We know that his family was aware and was concerned about the gun he had purchased. They claimed they didn't know about red flag. Nothing was done there, and we know the result there. We had a shooting. I've met the brother of one of the victims there. This man shot a number of people in different locations, people he had a grudge against. Police were very well aware of his dangerous nature, and unfortunately, they didn't do anything. And then, of course, as you know, the Club Q shooter. Law enforcement has a better success rate filing. Why? They're more familiar with the courts, with the judges, the court forms. Like I said before, citizens make more errors. I'm going to go through this pretty fast because we're running out of time. Some people say, well, if there's a domestic violence restraining order, protection order, why not? Doesn't that do the same thing? Not necessarily, because if it's only a temporary order, in the case of a temporary order or one that's handled in municipal courts, firearms aren't taken away. So you can still use an ERPO in addition to a domestic violence restraining order. We have a number of success stories. Connecticut, a man whose wife recently passed away, and EMTs were there to remove her body, and he made statements about that there was just no purpose in life. His firearms, many firearms were taken away. He was angry at first that this happened to him, but later he thanked them for saving his life. Another person who said, I was in a very dark place. So we've had success stories. I'm going to go past this. What can you do to help educate yourself about this? Talk to other people about it. If you hear someone who knows of somebody who's in crisis. We're certainly at Ceasefire, we're willing to go and speak to organizations like this about the ERPO law. We think it's really important. There's no point in having a law if people aren't aware of it, so we make ourselves available to go out and speak. Okay, next, before I go to questions, a couple of things. One, going back to Ceasefire for a moment, we welcome you, encourage you to get on our mailing list. So we'll be passing around a little form. When you're on our mailing list, I got to tell you, when you're on our mailing list, we are not an organization that blasts people with constant emails and requests for money. When it's the legislative session, we tend to send out a few more to let people know what's coming up in the legislature. The other months, we might do once a month, once every month or two, just what's going on. We don't normally do one fundraising letter per year and maybe an event. We don't believe in blasting people with all kind of email that they don't want, so just be aware of that. Next, I also want to say, here's our website, and I'm also going to pass out. This involves not so much ERPO, but the general question of gun violence. This is a paper that I put together a few years ago called "Responding to the Arguments of Gun Activists." I think it's really important that people know how to respond when you're in a conversation with somebody who may have a different opinion about gun violence. So I present a number of the common arguments of the more actively involved gun violence gun rights activists. And also I have another handout I'll send around. It has some important background information for you. One of them is a place you can go to find out who your state legislator is, in case you don't know who your Colorado House member and Senate member are. There's a website there you can find out who it is. I also provide the email address for your county sheriff, your new county sheriff. I will throw in a little bit of information here. I wrote to your county sheriff back on February 28th, asking him some questions about, does he have the same opinion of the red flag law as the previous county sheriff? I have not received a response to that email. I was at the state capitol on Wednesday to testify on the bills, and Sheriff Roy Ball testified, and I was sitting right next to him, right behind him at the table. So when he got up, I spoke to him and handed him my card and said, I sent you an email. I would really appreciate it if you would respond to that so I can share this, because I'm going to be speaking in your community about the ERPO law. I haven't heard back, so you might want to also write to him. And also there's a link to the county sheriff's office statement on the red flag law. I found it a bit confusing, frankly, and it was kind of buried within their website. It's not easy to find. They didn't make it easy to find. And then I also provided the website address for Colorado Ceasefire and also for my son's memorial website. And then I'll also point out that after the session, I'm not sure where, someplace in the back, I will have copies available of my book, which is all about my Columbine experiences, and it's called Walking in Daniel's Shoes, and it has that name because whenever I speak publicly, I wear my son's shoes. These are the shoes he was wearing that day at Columbine, and I feel that I'm walking in his place in this great debate about gun laws. And at that point, it's the point I'll take questions. Oh, yeah.
I have copies of talking points regarding the Senate Bill 170. expanding ERPO reporting options. So the other thing that I can do if you don't want to carry paper is when you sign up on the clipboard, just put a note there that says email me ERPO. But I'm going to leave this out here in the front, and it's basically goes through all the different points, and then we've got a number of source articles that this has come from as well. And it goes through, why is it okay to expand the reporter option? Will it not violate the therapist-patient relationship, all those different things? So, I can pass them out right now, or you can come and pick them up. Raise your hand if you want me to pass it out. Okay.
Thanks, Pat. Again, before I take your questions, thank you all for being here. I have to point out this, I've made many public presentations over the past 23 years. This is actually my first one on ERPO, so if it's a little bit rocky, it's because this is my first one using this new presentation. Questions?
Hi, I missed the beginning, so I didn't know, did you talk a little bit about what's going on in the state legislature right now and how we can make sure we move that forward, especially for legislators here in our county who are not really open to gun protection laws?
Yeah. So first of all, know who your House and Senate members are. Go to the Ceasefire website, and you will see the bills listed. Briefly stated, one of them would raise the age for purchasing a long gun from 18 to 21. You already have to be 21 to do a handgun, but this will now apply to long guns. Another bill would, like I said, increase the number of people who were eligible to apply for ERPO. And a key reason for that expansion is because we do have these sheriffs who aren't being cooperative and who aren't willing to file it themselves. So if they're not going to do it, then we need to have other people who were exposed. In the case of Columbine, the parents were clueless. They claimed they didn't know their kids were homicidal, and the sheriff's office kind of knew that these kids were dangerous, but they didn't do anything, and then they kind of covered it up later on. District attorney was aware, didn't do anything. One of the young men was being seen by a mental health counselor. He pulled it over on that counselor. So it wasn't successful, but it goes to show there are any number of different people who are aware of somebody being a danger to themselves or others, and other people who don't see it. So that's why we think it's better to have a number of more other people who are eligible to do it. Another law would ban assault weapons. That one's going to have a tougher road. Another would, help me out, Peter. Yes, would establish a 3-day waiting period for a firearm. We think that's especially important, especially for suicides. It tends to be an impulsive act, so you have to wait 3 days. You got 3 days to think about it and hopefully change your mind. And then also, thank you, Peter. I knew there was a good reason to have you there in front. Another law would repeal the law that we have right now that provides special immunity to the gun industry from lawsuits and punishes the people who would even dare to press a suit against them, so that gun violence victims can have their day in court. No other industry has immunity the way that the gun industry has. So those are the 5 bills that are starting to work their way through the legislature. So talk to your legislator. Even if you're a legislator, you know, oh, gee, they're just not gonna go for this. You need to tell them anyhow. During testimony, we had one legislator speak up from Colorado Springs. Both of them on the Senate side were from here in this area. One of them said, I've gotten 280 emails from people saying, oppose this. I've gotten none in support. We can't let them say that. Make that call or send that email. Okay, next.
Question right here. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you for the work that you're doing with Ceasefire. We've been contributing to Ceasefire for a number of years, and we greatly appreciate it. I have a question that was raised last Friday night on watching PBS News. There was a candidate for president who was saying that the problems is in the cities But I think David Brooks or whoever else was commenting was saying that per capita, there are more deaths by guns in the less populated states where Republican governors are present. Do you know anything about that?
I'll just speak in general terms. You'll find that some of the rural states like Wyoming will have a fairly high gun death rate, but lower than a number of other states, and theirs tend to be a lot of suicides. Suicides tend to sometimes be higher in some of the rural states, and Colorado is one of them. You know, we have a number of rural areas. We have a very high suicide rate. What you'll find is you have people saying that, oh, the states that have strict gun laws have higher crime and more gun deaths. That's simply not true. Some of the lower states are the states that have really strong gun laws. California, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Connecticut. Some of the higher ones are states like Missouri, Alabama, Mississippi that have very weak gun laws. Some people don't believe that because they'll hear, oh, we hear, you know, Chicago has a terrible gun violence problem, and yet they have strict gun laws. It's true that Chicago has a terrible problem with gun violence. But most of those guns, a lot of those guns come from other states that have weak gun laws. And the fact is that cities like St. Louis, New Orleans, Memphis, they're in states with weak gun laws. They have just as bad, if not worse, a problem than Chicago. Chicago gets picked on because it's larger and because gun lobby wants to point out the fact that they have high gun violence even though they have strict gun laws. Fact is that guns cross state boundaries just as easily as a car does. And that's why we have a problem. So long as you don't have a strong national gun law, you're going to continue to have a bad problem. But also, gun violence is more related to urbanized areas. You have more people crammed into city areas, you tend to have more of a gun violence problem. That's true. Rural areas, it tends to be more suicides.
There it is. Thank you so much for walking in Daniel's shoes. And my question was, you mentioned that that savvy officers know how to, collect the guns with the ERPO. Is there training for that, or like on-the-job training, or how does that work?
I do not know. We just know that we've heard from some police officers that this is how they go about it. I don't know if there's. I would think that there would be. Especially not even just because of ERPO, but because of the domestic violence restraining orders, that they're doing the same thing there. So I'm sure they've had that history in the past and will have an idea how to go about it.
I have a question about something I should know the answer to. That a number of years ago, the Congress passed a restriction on the CDC that they could not study gun violence as a health risk, which seems just absolutely incredible to me. And I lived a number of years when I was in college in Europe, and I have to say, the rest of the world thinks we're totally insane when they look at the data. So has that been overturned in Congress? Because that seems to me to be a clear path forward to show how much gun violence, what an incredible health risk it is in our country. Has that been repealed? I'm sorry, I should know the answer to that.
Yes. It has.
And when was that repealed?
And it was, I believe it was actually administrative action that did that. It wasn't a bill. It was.
Is the CDC now studying?
Yes, they are. They're
seen.
starting to do that. And the irony is that for so many years now, and I still hear it, we hear the extremists, the gun extremists saying, we shouldn't be passing gun laws. You need to find out what's behind all this gun violence. CDC couldn't do it. And that would be a major funding source for people doing research on it. So it tended to put a big damper on any research being done about, why do we have this big problem? So essentially they're being told it's not a public health problem. It is a public health problem.
Well, we need to push them to do that then, because that would be significant.
Yes.
Testing, there it is. Two questions, and they may actually be linked. Not too long ago, I asked someone about good ways to help address the gun violence problem. You said that ERPO is just one tool. Number one question would be, what are some next steps? And connected to that, it seems to me, this person said that we have a culture in America now that's got an addiction to guns. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it is a cultural problem. I think we also have a culture of revenge. I think a lot of these killings are from people, who in the past maybe might have committed suicide, and now today it's not enough to commit suicide. You want to take other people with you that you blame. I think that's part of it. And then when you just have so many, it's a lot like sitting at a basketball game, and the person in the front of you decides to stand up. Well, I guess I'm going to have to stand up. And the person behind you says the same thing. And I think especially this is happening, in some of our cities, that people feel like the only way I can be safe is to arm myself because I know that they're armed. It's pretty tough to reverse that. It's going to take a lot of steps to reverse that when we have 400 million firearms in the country. That's more than one for every adult. So, if having more firearms and having weak gun laws made us safer, would be the safest nation on earth, and clearly we're not. The Gun Violence Archive is a really good place to get information on data. The Gun Violence Archive, you can just look that up. They keep up-to-date numbers.
I'm wondering, with the sheriffs in Colorado who are refusing to cooperate with these laws, and it goes all the way back to the previous laws passed in 2013, what action can be taken by us to ensure that they do follow the laws that have been passed by the state?
Good question, and I guess my answer would first be, of course, vote them out, but in most of those counties, they're not going to be voted out. We've had a lot of tough talk from a number of those sheriffs, but a number of those sheriffs have requested ERPOs. So they're going to feel the political pressure. So I think especially once you hear of a shooting where it's real directly known, of course, wouldn't El Paso County be one of those ones, where it's known that an ERPO might have really prevented something. When they face that embarrassment, and when people say, shame on you, it's only then that you're really going to see change. Keep in mind that law enforcement has a lot of books, a lot of laws on the books that they're supposed to enforce, and they don't enforce everything. Just the same as speeding or any number of things. They do make choices, but it's important that the public say this is one choice you need to make. So that's why I put the email address of your county sheriff on that slip of paper. You need to write to him. You need to say, we just heard a presentation from Tom Mauser at our church, and I understand you didn't respond to it, and that he spoke to you at the state capitol and you still didn't respond to it. Until you put that kind of pressure on people, as long as they can get away with it, they're going to get away with it.
Yeah. When this subject comes up, typically there's talk, but we haven't mentioned it. So if you would address the gun show kind of escape clause and how that might affect ERPO, especially.
You're saying the gun show loophole? Well, we no longer have a gun show loophole. That was closed right after Columbine. That became a key thing for me because it played a role at Columbine. The fact that you could go into a gun show, if you go to the table of a registered gun dealer, a licensed gun dealer, you went through a background check. You go to the table here of a private, so-called private seller, no background check. And that's what my son's shooters did. They knew not to go to a gun dealer because they'd have to go through a background check. There'd be paperwork. They'd have to sign something. Not that they couldn't pass a background check. Well, they didn't actually make the purchase. It was an 18-year-old friend who bought it for them. But they knew they didn't want to be on the radar, so they went to the table of a private seller to get their guns. And that loophole was closed by you, the voters. 70% of the people who voted in 2000 closed that loophole. Yes, it comes up on a national basis because most states, including most of the ones around Colorado, have that gun show loophole where a person who's a felon, someone who is mentally disturbed, someone who's a domestic abuser can still walk into a gun show. In most states in this country, go to a private seller and no background check. It's really shameful. The guns being shipped across state lines in Colorado, that doesn't happen because we have universal background checks. So it used to be that you could, for example, buy a gun online, no background check. Well, now there is a background check. Now, can there be companies that try to get around that? I'm sure there probably could be, and until you catch them, it could be a problem. But nationally, because we have such weak gun laws at a national level, the trade in firearms is rampant.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. I've got Dr. Ridings and then this file. Okay.
I may have missed this, but you keep talking about the sheriff. Can we not go through city law enforcement for this?
Excellent point. Yes, if it's within the city limits, I would go to the police chief. Yes, police chiefs will tend to be much more cooperative than county sheriffs. Once you get outside the city limits, then you have to rely on the sheriff.
I don't actually have a question, I have a comment. I was a teacher at Daniel's school, elementary school, on the day Columbine happened. And I knew one of the shooters from having school experience with him. And ever since then, I have been very active in trying to get gun violence under control and gun safety. I'm part of Mom's Demand Action. But I also wanted to say that last Wednesday I was up in Denver listening to him testify for the red flag laws. And I found it extremely eye-opening to hear the arguments of the people who were against it. The people who were for it were very compassionate, very compelling. You could sense desperation in their voices about the need for this. And the people who were against it were just flouting all of those myths that he presented up there. So if you ever have a chance to go and sit in on one of those hearings, I really encourage that. It was eye-opening.
It was 11 and a half hours at one Senate hearing on Wednesday, because in Colorado, we give everybody the chance. Anybody who wants to speak and testify can do that. But that means it's a very long hearing, because especially the other side likes to try to shut things down and make it uncomfortable for everybody hearing a lot of testimony that's usually very much alike, nothing new. But that's what we do in Colorado. You're given 2 minutes to testify. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much to Tom Mauser and Pat for coming and bringing what you do in this vital work to us. Thank you, everyone. And also, Tom, I believe you brought copies of your book for sale, is that right? Yes. So if you'd like to buy a copy of Tom's book, he's got some up here for sale, okay?
And again, I wanted to
book is
emphasize,
$15, by the way.
We've got some really good current legislative updates, very informative information, so please don't hesitate to share your email. We do not share email lists with anybody. We're here to inform, and occasionally we will also ask folks across Colorado to contact their elected official and make it easy for you to do so. So please keep in touch with us. We'll keep in touch with you and do it honorably. Thank you.